This is the story of Julia Park, a 25-year-old temporary administrative assistant at Brighter Future, an educational tech company nestled in the heart of downtown Seattle. Every morning at precisely 7:30, Julia arrived at the towering glass building that reflected a city always in motion. Her bag, a scuffed messenger slung across one shoulder, held not only her essentials but also the silent weight of responsibilities never listed in any job description. She drifted through the sleek marble lobby like a ghost in daylight, seen yet not quite acknowledged. Still, she greeted the security guard warmly. "Good morning, Mr. Howard," she'd say, with a voice that didn't demand attention, only offered sincerity. Mr. Howard, a 70-year-old man with kind eyes and decades of quiet observation behind them, always smiled. Julia was the only one who remembered his name. What no one knew was that Julia Park was far more than a quiet temp. Behind those reserved eyes was a mind that never stopped observing. Every inefficiency, every neglected problem within the company's four walls, she noticed them all. While the world saw her as the girl who filed papers and fetched coffee, Julia saw patterns. She saw systems. And most of all, she saw a company on the brink of something better if only someone would listen. But Julia's journey didn't begin in a corporate tower, it began in a university lecture hall. 3 years earlier, she was a bright, passionate student at the University of Washington, majoring in early childhood development. Her dream was to teach, to foster curiosity, create safety, and shape the minds of the next generation. But life has a way of rewriting our stories. When Julia's mother lost her battle with cancer during her junior year, everything shattered. With her younger brother Michael still in high school, Julia made a decision thousands of young people face every year. She dropped out to become the breadwinner. The family she once dreamed of teaching became the one she had to protect. The transition was brutal. From bright student to temporary worker, Julia entered a world that didn't reward kindness or patience. Her natural introversion, once an asset in one-on-one teaching, now rendered her invisible in the hustle of corporate politics. She listened more than she spoke, absorbed everything but asserted nothing. In a company that celebrated noise, Julia was a whisper. Brighter Future, a company that proudly developed software to empower schools, had forgotten how to empower its own people. The higher you climbed, the further you drifted from the ground. Executives operated from the 15th floor, their voices echoing in conference rooms insulated by glass and status. Meanwhile, support staff like Julia worked in quiet corners, only noticed when something broke. She existed in a liminal space, not quite part of the team, not quite a stranger, always on the edge. Daniel Rowe, the 46-year-old CEO, was a man molded by hardship. Once a scholarship student who'd clawed his way from community college to Harvard Business School, Daniel knew what it meant to fight for opportunity, but success had blurred that memory. He had become a portrait, admired, respected, yet emotionally detached. That changed after tragedy struck. The loss of his younger sister to depression cracked the armor around his heart. Suddenly he noticed what he once ignored. The janitor working 3 jobs, the intern skipping meals, and the quiet assistant who always seemed to carry burdens no one assigned her. And then there was Megan Torres. At 27, she was the epitome of corporate ambition, flawlessly dressed, unnervingly competent, and always 2 steps ahead. Megan had mastered the language of leadership, confidence, charisma, control. She had no patience for inefficiency, and to her, Julia was exactly that, a soft echo in a place that demanded volume. To Megan, Julia represented the risk of compassion in a meritocratic world, and Megan, having fought her own battles to rise through the ranks, had no interest in slowing down for anyone who couldn't keep up. But Mr. Howard, the security guard who'd watched generations of employees walk through those doors, saw something different. A former vocational counselor in another life, he recognized the spark that others missed. He noticed the way Julia lit up when talking about the educational programs, how she stayed late to organize materials she'd never get credit for. The notes she left behind, thoughtful and precise, for colleagues who never noticed her name. Quiet, he would later say, isn't the same as empty. Some vessels are just too deep to echo. The pieces were quietly falling into place at Brighter Future, across conference rooms where fortunes were decided, in supply closets where forgotten employees toiled, and at a security desk where one man watched the unspoken stories unfold. No one saw it yet, but a storm of change was building, and at its heart stood Julia, unaware, unassuming, and completely essential. Because sometimes the smallest voice speaks the truth loudest. Sometimes the person who apologizes for everyone else's mistakes is the one person who's never made one of her own. As autumn turned cold and winter crept in, the pressure began to mount. The company's flagship product, a cutting-edge adaptive learning platform, was unraveling. Glitches, complaints, and missed deadlines snowballed. Teachers grew frustrated, school districts threatened to cancel contracts, competitors circled like wolves. Inside Brighter Future, stress crackled like static. Emergency meetings replaced lunch breaks. Executives barked orders, department heads scrambled, and the tension seeped through every level of the organization. No one was spared, not even the temps. And quietly, inevitably, Julia Park found herself at a crossroads. Julia's days began earlier and ended later than most. She wasn't clocking in for overtime. She was covering the cracks in a system no one else seemed to see. Tasks multiplied endlessly. When the printer failed moments before a presentation that could decide a school district's future, Julia fixed it, her fingers ink-mudged but steady. When catering vanished for a high-stakes executive meeting, she calmly contacted a local restaurant that delivered within 20 minutes. When clients needed unexpected accommodations, Julia had already anticipated the need and bookmarked hotels with teacher-friendly policies. But here's the cruel paradox of being the glue that holds things together. You're often the last one anyone notices. The better Julia did her job, the more invisible she became. Her competence had become the net that caught everyone else's carelessness. They leaned harder, assuming she'd never let things fall. And she didn't. But it came at a cost. Meanwhile, Megan Torres flourished in the spotlight. Daniel Rowe increasingly leaned on her as his trusted executive assistant. She spoke with poise, led meetings with the polish of a TED speaker, and delivered updates wrapped in strategic jargon. Her style was crisp, her wardrobe curated to corporate perfection. And yet, beneath the sheen, something vital was missing: depth. Megan was brilliant at optics, but when it came to the intricate mechanics of the company's software, she faltered. She fielded calls from confused teachers and routed them with cold efficiency, never pausing to understand the underlying frustrations. When clients asked for product tweaks, she promised customizations that were technically impossible. The development team was left scrambling behind her wake of polished words. Julia, on the other hand, understood teachers. She had been raised in classrooms, spending afternoons helping her mother teach underfunded after-school programs. So when educators left frustrated voicemails or wrote desperate emails, Julia didn't just process the messages. She listened. She saw the patterns others missed, the pain in their tone, the exhaustion behind their questions. She began to track them. Each complaint, each technical hiccup, each point of failure. She filled spreadsheets no one asked for, driven by a quiet mission to help children learn better. Her passion for education never left her. It simply took a different form. She read white papers on adaptive learning, absorbed video lectures about cognitive development, and mapped it all to the gaps in Brighter Future's platform. But when she tried to share her findings with Megan, she was met with a smirk and a wave of perfectly manicured fingers. "Julia, I appreciate your enthusiasm," Megan would say, her voice dripping with patronizing restraint. "But client strategy is handled at the executive level. Why don't you focus on the supply orders?" The words stung, not because they were harsh, but because they mirrored a system that refused to see value beyond titles. Still, Julia swallowed the insult and kept working, in silence, in shadows, but always forward. At the same time, Daniel Rowe found himself drifting deeper into a personal reckoning. The company was under siege, investors were pressing, the board was restless, and the cracks in their flagship platform were widening. But it was his sister's voice, echoing in memory, that haunted him most. "I always felt invisible, even when I was screaming for help." That sentence had embedded itself in his mind, like a splinter in the soul. It made him question everything: his leadership, his culture, his company. How many people were screaming in silence, unnoticed beneath the layers of hierarchy? That Tuesday morning in November was supposed to be routine, a quarterly review with the Portland School District, their largest client. Megan had crafted a sleek presentation, boasting improved engagement metrics and glowing testimonials from a handful of compliant administrators. Daniel hoped it would be enough. But Dr. Sarah Chen, Portland's Director of Educational Technology, had come prepared with data that told a very different story. "There are troubling trends," Dr. Chen began, her calm voice commanding attention as she shared her screen. "Teacher abandonment rates have jumped 37% since implementation. The software's adaptive algorithms don't accommodate learning differences effectively, and our special education coordinators say the system adds more obstacles than it removes." The room fell silent. Executives shifted uncomfortably. Megan's smile faltered. Her slides were suddenly irrelevant. Dr. Chin pressed on. "We're also hearing serious complaints about customer support. Teachers spend hours on hold, only to be transferred and offered generic answers. They feel dismissed and exhausted." Daniel felt the slow twist of anxiety in his gut. These weren't just numbers. They were echoes of the same cries he'd ignored from his sister. This was about real children, struggling, frustrated, and unseen. "I assure you, Dr. Chen," Megan cut in smoothly, trying to steer the narrative, "our user surveys show overwhelmingly positive responses." "With respect," Dr. Chen interjected firmly, "those surveys were filled out by administrators, not teachers. What works on paper isn't working in classrooms. We need real solutions." 3 floors below, in a cramped supply room, Julia was arranging binders when she heard the tension rising through the vents. Voices escalated, echoing the frustration she had cataloged for months, and in her hand she held the folder. Data, insights, and suggestions that could turn the tide. Her feet moved before her doubt could catch up. She climbed the stairs toward the conference room, each step echoing with the weight of self-doubt. She knew what the meeting was about. She knew her notes could help. But as she reached the glass wall and saw Megan standing confidently, commanding the room, a wall of inadequacy closed in. This wasn't her world. She didn't have a title, a degree, or a designer's suit. Just pages of insight and a heart that understood children better than any algorithm. She turned around. Her hands trembled as she returned to the shadows of the supply room, the folder still clutched tightly, like a secret only she believed in. Upstairs, the meeting ended with a fragile truce. Portland would continue using Brighter Future's platform for 6 more months. Under review. Dr. Chen's final words rang out like a quiet ultimatum. "We believe in your mission, but we need to see that you believe in ours." In the days that followed, panic consumed the executive floor. Consultants were brought in, late-night meetings became the norm, and blame ricocheted like bullets in a glass maze. But the core issues, still untouched. From her silent post, Julia watched the storm swirl. She saw department heads pointing fingers instead of asking questions. She saw programmers rushing to patch bugs that weren't the root of the problem, because the issue was never just technical, it was human. The software was failing not due to broken code, but broken empathy. It wasn't built for the way children actually learn. And Julia knew this, not because someone had assigned her to figure it out, but because she had lived it. She had studied it. She had built personas from real complaints. She understood the heartbeat of the classroom, even if no one thought to ask her. The question now was, how long could the company afford not to listen? Julia had spent months quietly compiling a mosaic of voices that spanned the nation. Elementary educators in urban districts, special education coordinators in rural communities, ESL instructors working tirelessly with children of newly arrived immigrants. Each note, each quote, each frustration became a thread in the fabric of her unofficial report. But no matter how precise her observations, or how thoroughly she connected the data to Brighter Future's own mission, every attempt she made to share her findings hit the same invisible wall. Her passion, rooted in a deep love for children and learning, was interpreted not as dedication but as overstepping. Her insights, built on hours of unpaid research and genuine concern, were brushed off as naive idealism. To the gatekeepers of corporate legitimacy, Julia didn't have the pedigree or position to speak on strategy, and to Megan, especially, her quiet brilliance had become a threat. The Portland meeting had rattled Megan's carefully composed image. For the first time, the cracks were visible. Her flawless presentations hadn't masked her shallow understanding of the product. She'd made promises the company couldn't keep, and in her frustration, she began to suspect something unthinkable. Julia, the assistant she'd dismissed as soft and insignificant, might actually know more than she did. The realization festered. Rather than confronting the truth, Megan fell deeper into defense mode. She began excluding Julia from planning meetings, cutting her off from client-facing information, and planting subtle doubts in others. "I'm concerned about Julia's recent behavior," she told HR one afternoon, her voice calm, measured, and false. "She seems to be inserting herself into projects well outside her responsibilities. We need to maintain professional boundaries." But beyond the politics and personal tensions, the situation at Brighter Future was deteriorating rapidly. More school districts echoed Portland's concerns. Engagement metrics sank, and teacher retention dropped below critical thresholds. In his glass-walled office, Daniel Rowe stared at spreadsheets that should have told a story of progress, but instead revealed decay. What had started as a mission to uplift children was now crumbling under bureaucracy and corporate blindness. The breaking point came on a snow-covered afternoon in December. Representatives from Chicago, Denver, and Phoenix, the company's three largest clients, were scheduled for a joint video conference that could determine Brighter Future's survival. The call was set for 2:00 p.m. By 1:30, the executive team had gathered, tense and silent, in the main conference room. Megan had crafted another signature presentation, filled with fresh metrics and cherry-picked quotes, aiming to restore confidence. But disaster struck. "The files won't open," Tom Richardson, the IT director, said, his voice thin with panic. "Something's wrong with the master presentation." Megan's posture stiffened. "That's not possible. I saved backups on 3 separate systems." "They're all corrupted," Tom replied. "Looks like a synchronization error from last night's system update. We've lost everything." The room broke into frantic motion. Phones rang, people sprinted to gather last-minute stats, voices clashed as the deadline loomed. In 13 minutes, they'd have to face their most important clients with empty slides and vague reassurance. In a quiet adjacent room, Julia had been assembling supplies for an unrelated presentation. She saw the chaos unfold through the glass wall, saw the panic bloom on every face, and while the others scrambled for scattered pieces, she realized something no one else knew. She had the puzzle completed. For months, Julia had maintained a shadow database, a fully structured, meticulously detailed trove of user feedback, categorized by issue, demographic, and urgency. It wasn't just technical. It was pedagogical. Her data reflected the voices of real teachers with real students, not executives, but educators in the trenches. And now, her time had come. She stood in the doorway of the conference room, her heart racing. "Megan," she began, barely louder than a whisper. "I think I can help." Megan snapped her head around, incredulous. "Julia, we're in the middle of a crisis. If this is about a supply order..." "I've been tracking feedback," Julia continued, the words shaking from her lips. "I've got data. Engagement metrics, teacher retention rates, accessibility insights from special ed coordinators. I've been organizing it since September." The room froze. Daniel looked up. For the first time, really looked at her. There was something in Julia's tone, a fragile strength beneath the nerves, the quiet conviction of someone who knew her value but had never been allowed to speak it aloud. "What kind of data do you have?" he asked gently. "Breakdowns by school district, comparisons across grade levels, annotated feedback from teachers. I even drafted recommendations based on my research into adaptive learning models," she said, her voice steadier now. "Everything's current. I updated the files yesterday." Tom glanced up from his laptop. "If we can pull that data, we might be able to salvage this." Megan, still reeling, stepped in. "Daniel, this is absurd. Julia isn't authorized. She doesn't have client-level clearance. Whatever she's compiled is probably inaccurate and..." "It's not," Julia said, more firmly now. "It's based on the actual feedback that's been overlooked. I didn't just collect data. I analyzed it." The wall clock ticked. 1:47 p.m. 13 minutes left. Daniel saw it then. Not just Julia's competence, but her courage. The kind of quiet resilience that doesn't ask for credit, just permission to care. She reminded him of himself, long ago in rooms that felt too big and voices that felt too loud. "Julia," he said, his voice low but unwavering, "show me what you've got." She turned and hurried back to her desk, her hands trembling as they gathered her files. Behind her, Megan's voice rose again, sharp and desperate. "Daniel, we're about to face our biggest clients with amateur-hour research. This is incredibly unprofessional." But no one answered. Because in that moment something irreversible had shifted in the room. And at Brighter Future, the spotlight had found its way, finally, to the person who'd never asked for it. And what happened next would rewrite more than a meeting. It would rewrite the company's future. When Julia returned to the conference room, folders tucked under one arm, tablet in hand, something shifted. The energy in the room, once frantic and uncertain, slowed, almost reverent. As she began laying out her notes, the executives leaned in, not because she demanded their attention, but because the data itself did. It wasn't just comprehensive, it was revelatory. Month by month, Julia had traced patterns that even the official analytics had overlooked. She'd connected the spikes in user abandonment to specific technical issues, filtered through the lens of teacher feedback, and distilled them into actionable insights. But this wasn't just numbers, it was a story. A story about real classrooms, real kids, and the subtle ways a platform designed to help was unintentionally leaving them behind. "Here," Julia said gently, tapping her tablet. "You can see that schools with higher populations of students in special education are abandoning the platform at 3 times the rate of other schools. It's not the students, it's the interface. It doesn't integrate with common assistive technologies." Daniel leaned in, visibly intrigued. "How did you uncover that?" "I started noticing a pattern in the support tickets," Julia replied. "Teachers from these schools kept reporting the same issues. so I began logging the complaints and cross-referencing them with public demographic data from the Department of Education. Tom Richardson, hunched over his laptop, quickly pulled up the platform's accessibility settings. "She's right," he muttered, surprised. "We built for standard classrooms. No one ever tested compatibility with screen readers or voice command tools." Encouraged by the sudden attention, Julia found her voice strengthening. She flipped to another tab. "Engagement drop-offs in Chicago? They're not random either. The data clusters around schools with high numbers of English language learners. The algorithm misreads language acquisition as a learning delay." She paused, then added softly, "In my free time, I've been studying developmental linguistics. English language learners require a different scaffold. The platform treats their reading challenges like disabilities, but often it's just about language access." The room, once chaotic, now held a tense, respectful silence. Even Megan, who had previously bristled at Julia's every suggestion, remained still, her usual dismissive glare now unreadable. "What about solutions?" Daniel asked. Julia's eyes lit up. It was the question she had dreamed of hearing. "Yes," she said, pulling out a hand-drawn flowchart clearly crafted with care. "Most of the fixes aren't technical, they're pedagogical. We need to teach the system how to identify different types of learning challenges. We also need to give teachers diagnostic tools so they can customize support based on their students' real needs." Daniel studied the chart. Every arrow, every annotation reflected a deep understanding not just of technology, but of children. "How long have you been working on this?" "Since I started," Julia admitted. "I know it's not part of my job, but I couldn't stop thinking about the students. This platform can help them, but only if we build it right." It was 1:58 p.m., 2 minutes until the make-or-break conference call. Daniel made his decision. "Tom, transfer Julia's data to the main system." "Already on it," Tom said, fingers flying over the keyboard. "Megan," Daniel said, his voice firm but diplomatic, "I need you to coordinate the logistics of the call, audio, screen share, everything." "Of course," Megan replied, her tone tight but controlled. Then Daniel turned to Julia. "I need you to present your findings." Julia's breath caught in her throat. The room swiveled toward her. Her cheeks flushed with sudden heat. I don't think I'm qualified for that." Daniel met her eyes, unwavering. "You're the most qualified person in this room. You understand the users better than any of us. These districts don't need another glossy pitch. They need someone who gets what their teachers are really facing." At exactly 2:00 p.m., the screen flickered to life. 4 faces appeared. Dr. Sarah Chen from Portland, Dr. Marcus Williams from Chicago, Dr. Jennifer Martinez from Denver, and Dr. Robert Thompson from Phoenix. Daniel began, his voice stripped of corporate bravado. "Thank you for joining us. Before we begin, I need to acknowledge something. We failed to meet your expectations, and more importantly, we failed your students. Today, I'd like you to hear from someone who's been listening when others haven't." He nodded toward Julia. "This is Julia Park, our educational research specialist." Julia froze. That wasn't her title. That wasn't even close. But Daniel's words had given her something more powerful than a title. Permission. She took a breath and spoke. "Dr. Chen, Dr. Williams, Dr. Martinez, thank you for your patience with us. I've been reviewing your teachers' feedback, and I'd like to begin by addressing the concerns you've voiced." Her voice was soft but sincere, and in that sincerity, the room and the screen grew still. "Dr. Williams," she continued, "your ESL coordinators are right. Our system was built around assumptions made for native English speakers. It misreads reading struggles as comprehension failures when they're often language background. Module into our diagnostic tools." Dr. Williams leaned forward. "That's exactly what we've been trying to communicate. How do we fix it?" Julia's confidence rose with each answer. We start by distinguishing between learning disabilities and language acquisition barriers. Then we deliver different supports depending on that distinction. Dr. Martinez from Denver added, "Our special education staff feel the same way. Too many of our students are being misidentified." Julia nodded. "We're treating slower processing as a disability when sometimes it's just a need for a different pace. I've created a new diagnostic flow that helps differentiate these needs more accurately." Tom shared her diagram onto the screen. The client studied it intently. Then Dr. Thompson, who'd been silent until now, said, "This is the kind of thinking we rarely see. Adaptive, contextual, student-centered." Julia smiled. "Each of your districts has unique needs. Phoenix needs bilingual learning tools. Chicago needs better offline access. Denver's needs are rooted in mobility. One size fits all doesn't work for children. It never has." Even Dr. Chen, who had entered the call visibly skeptical, was now jotting notes. These recommendations show a level of understanding that's been missing in every other meeting we've had with tech providers. "I have to credit your teachers," Julia said humbly. "The information was always there. The problem wasn't a lack of feedback. It was that we didn't listen." Then Dr. Williams asked, "Julia, what's your background? You're speaking like someone who's lived this. You speak like someone who's actually worked in diverse classrooms," Dr. Williams said, leaning forward with curiosity. Julia's cheeks turned a shade pinker, but her voice didn't waver. "I studied early childhood education in college, and I spent years helping my mother run after-school programs for immigrant families. I didn't finish my degree. My mom passed away during my junior year, and I had to support my younger brother. But I've never stopped learning. I've studied developmental pedagogy and adaptive learning models in my own time, every night after work." The response from the clients was instant and genuine. Dr. Martinez, whose face had been tense for much of the call, smiled for the first time. "That explains why you understand our reality so well. Most education tech companies are started by people who've never even stepped foot in a public school classroom." And then Dr. Thompson from Phoenix spoke the words that would change everything. "Julia, would you be willing to lead the implementation of these improvements in our district? We'd want you working directly with our curriculum coordinators and special education staff." Before she could reply, Dr. Williams from Chicago added, "We'd like the same. Having someone who understands what our students need, not just technically, but emotionally, is invaluable." Dr. Chen, who had entered the call with skepticism, nodded. "Absolutely. Julia, having you as our primary point of contact would address most of our partnership concerns. We don't need a vendor, we need an advocate." Julia looked around the room, stunned. 3 major districts, each representing tens of thousands of students, had bypassed the executives and client liaisons. They wanted her. A temp, a dropout, someone no one saw coming. Daniel Rowe, watching the transformation unfold with both pride and clarity, stood. "Julia," he said, his voice quiet but unmistakable, "I'm promoting you to Director of Educational Partnerships, effective immediately. You'll be responsible for working directly with our school districts to tailor our platform to their unique needs." The room fell silent again, this time with awe. Within hours, word spread like wildfire through every floor of Brighter Future. The assistant in the basement, quiet, reserved, forgotten, had just been made a director, not because she climbed the traditional ladder, but because she changed the game altogether. But Julia's transformation wasn't just about a new title. In Phoenix, she spent days inside classrooms, not observing from behind glass, but sitting with teachers, asking questions, watching how real learning happened. Her presence was humble, her questions thoughtful. She didn't arrive with answers. She listened. The changes she implemented led to a 200% increase in teacher retention on the platform in under a month. In Chicago, she worked hand in hand with ESL coordinators, co-creating modules tailored to students from Arabic, Spanish, and Mandarin-speaking homes. The pilot was so effective that the district presented it at a national education conference. And in every school she touched, teachers began to feel heard for the first time. Internally, her rise sent ripples through Brighter Futures culture. Employees who'd once feared speaking up now felt empowered. Engineers started proposing innovations that went beyond code. A cafeteria worker who tracked which healthy meals employees actually ate was asked to redesign the wellness menu. Even the janitor, who quietly logged patterns of system crashes, was invited to IT meetings. The company no longer equated leadership with volume. Insight became currency. Mr. Howard, the security guard who had seen Julia's potential from the very start, beamed with pride one morning as she passed his desk. "Some folks lead from the front," he said with a soft smile. "Others lead from behind. But the wise ones, they learn to do both." Even Megan's story began to shift. At first, she struggled with the change, her ego bruised by Julia's rapid ascent, but over time she recognized that Julia's strengths didn't eclipse hers, they complemented them. Megan's gift for presentation found new purpose in helping Julia's insights reach larger audiences. Slowly but surely they became allies, not rivals. Financially, the company rebounded faster than anyone anticipated. Contracts once at risk were not only renewed, they expanded. Client satisfaction scores reached record highs, teacher retention on the platform doubled, then tripled. And most importantly, for the first time, student outcomes began improving across every measurable demographic. National attention followed. Education journals profiled Julia as the quiet revolutionary reshaping edtech. Harvard Business Review ran a case study on Brighter Futures' cultural turnaround, citing Julia's promotion as the turning point. Universities reached out to offer her opportunities to finish her degree on her terms. But for Julia, the most meaningful recognition came not from headlines or titles. It came in the form of simple, handwritten emails. "Dear Julia," wrote Mrs. Rodriguez from a Title I school in Phoenix, "your changes to the reading assessments helped 3 of my students avoid unnecessary special education referrals. They weren't disabled. They just needed to see themselves in the material. Thank you for seeing them, not as problems, but as people." Julia kept those letters tucked in her office drawer. 6 months later, Brighter Future was no longer just a tech company. It was a movement. The quarterly board meeting, once dominated by tense budget talk, now brimmed with pride and optimism. "Client tension is up 67%, Daniel announced. "Teacher satisfaction has improved 200%, and student outcomes are rising across the board." But beyond the metrics was a deeper truth. The culture had changed. Employees who once stayed silent found their voices. Hidden talents emerged from every floor. The janitor, the cook, the intern, everyone was being asked not just what they did, but what they noticed. "Sometimes," Daniel told the board, "innovation doesn't come from the loudest voice in the room. It comes from the one who's been listening the longest." And Julia? She had changed too. Gone were the hesitant steps and whispered apologies. She now walked with quiet strength, her voice steady, her vision clear. Her office on the 12th floor, walls adorned with thank you letters and a view of the city skyline, stood as a monument not to ambition, but to purpose. Her family's life had changed as well. With her new income, Julia moved them into a safer, brighter apartment. Her brother Michael, once the reason she left college, now applied to universities with dreams of becoming a teacher himself. "I used to think I'd failed," Julia said during a guest lecture at her former university. "I didn't finish college. I worked a job that made me feel invisible. But sometimes, failure is just a disguise for preparation." And each morning, she still arrived early, still reviewed spreadsheets, still carried the same fire. Only now, the door bore her name, and everyone knew it. Julia found herself developing skills she'd never envisioned needing: public speaking, strategic planning, budget allocation. But Daniel, her mentor, reminded her often that learning went both ways. "You've taught me something," he told her during one of their quiet, thoughtful mentoring sessions. "The best leaders aren't the ones who command the spotlight. They're the ones who build it so others can shine." Even Megan Torres, who once viewed Julia's rise as a threat, had begun her own transformation. At a recent team reflection meeting, Megan spoke with humility and clarity. "I used to think being professional meant being perfect. Julia showed me that professionalism means being honest about what you don't know and committed to learning it." By spring, Julia stood in a role she never dared to dream, not just as a leader, but as a mentor to others who had once felt invisible too. Under her guidance, Brighter Future launched the Hidden Talents Initiative, a program inviting employees from every level to propose innovations. The first to step forward was Maria Santos, a night custodian who had tracked patterns in energy usage. Her ideas saved thousands in utility costs and earned her a promotion to facilities coordinator. Then came David Kim, an unassuming intern who redesigned the customer service ticket system. His overhaul reduced response times by 40%, and he was offered a full-time role in process innovation. "This," Daniel declared at the company's annual meeting, "is what I want Brighter Future to be remembered for, not just as a tech company, but as a place that develops human potential." Julia's responsibilities soon extended beyond school partnerships. She worked closely with HR to identify overlooked contributions and build personalized paths for growth. The most emotional moment came when she received a letter from Dr. Amanda Peterson, her former professor. "Dear Julia, I followed your extraordinary journey. We would be honored to help you complete your degree through our executive education program. You've already gone beyond where most of our graduates dream of. Let us help you finish what you started." For Julia, the offer meant more than a credential. It was a symbol that her unconventional path had brought her exactly where she was always meant to be. 1 year after that pivotal winter meeting, Brighter Future hosted its first Innovation Through Inclusion conference. Educators and tech leaders filled the newly constructed auditorium, a space that now stood where Julia once stocked shelves in a storage room. Taking the stage, she looked out at the packed audience of superintendents, teachers, and fellow changemakers. "A year ago," Julia began, her voice steady and strong, "I was invisible in this building. I filed papers for meetings I wasn't invited to. I fixed problems I wasn't authorized to solve." She paused. The room was still, breathless with attention. "I want to tell you about the day I almost quit. I had been blamed, dismissed, and made to feel small in a system that rewarded volume over value. I was ready to accept invisibility." Her eyes found Mr. Howard, seated in the front row, dressed in his finest suit, a proud smile on his face. "But one person believed in me, before I believed in myself. One person listened when I had no voice, and that changed everything." She gestured toward Daniel, seated among the executive team. "What I've learned is this: every organization has Julia Parks. People who see what others miss, people who hear what others ignore, people whose insights can transform everything if only someone would listen." The room buzzed with a collective realization. They'd all known someone like that, or been someone like that. Julia continued, her voice rising with passion. "True leadership isn't about being the smartest person in the room. It's about creating a room where everyone's intelligence can thrive. It's not about having all the answers. It's about asking the questions that help others find their voice." Dr. Sarah Chen stood up. "Julia, your model changed how we implement technology and how we value people. Can this apply outside the corporate world?" Julia smiled, the moment wrapping around her like a soft wind. Absolutely. Whether it's a classroom, a company, or a community center, the principle is the same. Every space holds unseen brilliance. Every group has voices waiting to be heard. The systems we create must be designed to invite them in, not keep them out. Her final slide showed a simple circle, arrows pointing inward. Inclusive innovation model. This isn't about being nice to quiet people. It's about solving big problems with deep, diverse insight. And that insight only emerges when we value different ways of thinking. The applause was thunderous, but Julia wasn't finished. I want to leave you with a challenge. Go back to your organizations and find the listeners, the quiet problem solvers, the ones who don't speak often, but who carry solutions inside them. Recognize them. Empower them. As the conference wrapped up, Julia was surrounded by educators. A principal from Montana shared how a custodian had pioneered a literacy program. A superintendent from Detroit spoke of a parent whose volunteer work had reshaped engagement policy. But one conversation stayed with Julia. A young teacher named Rebecca approached her, eyes glassy with emotion. "Miss Park, I've been teaching for 3 years. I've felt invisible every single day. I have ideas for my ESL students, but I'm always told I'm too new, too quiet. Your story gave me hope." Julia took her hands gently. "Rebecca," she said, "don't wait for permission. Start in your classroom, track everything, build evidence. Let the impact speak even if others don't hear it yet. Recognition will come, but your students will always see you first." That night, Julia walked through the same lobby where she once felt small. The marble still gleamed, but now it reflected someone transformed, someone who had taken every moment of doubt and turned it into a mission. Mr. Howard met her by the front desk. "You know what I'm proudest of?" he asked, smiling with eyes full of memory. "What's that, Mr. Howard?" "You didn't get louder, you got more generous. Success didn't make you shout, it made you listen harder." Daniel joined them, his hands full of conference materials. "Julia," he asked, "do you ever regret the path? The detours, the setbacks?" She paused. "A year ago, maybe, but not now. Those detours gave me something I couldn't have found otherwise. I wouldn't understand what it's like to be invisible. I wouldn't know how to help others find their voice. I wouldn't be here." She looked around the bustling lobby, filled with quiet laughter and purposeful conversation. All of it, the struggle, the stillness, the silence, it prepared me for this work. And as the three stood together, the security guard who first believed, the CEO who learned to listen, and the assistant who changed everything, they became a symbol of something larger. "You know what this story is really about?" Julia said finally, her voice warm and unwavering. "It's not about quiet people being better than loud people. It's about recognizing that every person carries something valuable. Every voice has power, and when we build systems that only reward one kind of expression, we don't just silence the unheard, we silence our own potential." She smiled, her words now etched in the hearts of everyone listening. The real tragedy isn't who we overlook, it's what we lose when we do. So if this story moved something in you, it's likely because you've been Julia, or Daniel, or Mr. Howard. And now, maybe, just maybe, it's your turn to listen more deeply, or finally be heard. Subscribe not just for stories, but for a movement that believes quiet wisdom is not just worthy of recognition, but essential to our future. Because when we create space for the voices long silenced, we don't just change organizations, we change lives.